10 years ago, my father exiled me, claiming I stole $30,000 from his safe. I lost everything. Yesterday, my brother tore down a basement wall and found the cash, dusty, untouched, and accompanied by a note in Dad's own handwriting. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The silence in my office was usually my sanctuary. It was a controlled environment, a sterile glass box 20 floors above the city where numbers behaved exactly as they were supposed to. As a forensic accountant, my entire life was dedicated to finding the things people tried desperately to hide. I tracked hidden assets in divorce settlements, unraveled corporate embezzlement schemes, and reconstructed financial truths from shredded documents. I was good at it because I knew, better than anyone, how easily a lie could destroy a life. I was deep into a spreadsheet, cross-referencing a shell company's bank withdrawals for a high-stakes litigation case, when my personal phone buzzed against the mahogany desk. The vibration was a harsh, jarring sound against the quiet hum of the air conditioning. I glanced at the screen. Lucas. My younger brother. My hand hovered over the device. Lucas and I had a complicated relationship, not because we didn't love each other, but because he was the only thread connecting me to a life I had been forced to incinerate 10 years ago. He was the one allowed to stay. I was the one thrown out like garbage. We usually kept our calls brief, checking in on birthdays or holidays, maintaining a safe, shallow distance to avoid picking at the scabs of the past. But he was calling at 2:00 p.m. on a Tuesday. Lucas was a contractor. He should have been on a job site, covered in sawdust, not making social calls. I picked it up, sliding my thumb across the glass. Lucas, is everything okay? The sound on the other end was a wet, ragged gasp. It sounded like he had just run a marathon, or like he was on the verge of vomiting. Lauren, he choked out. His voice was trembling so violently that the static on the line seemed to jump. Lauren, you need to sit down. Are you sitting down? My stomach dropped, a cold stone plummeting through my intestines. I'm at work. What's wrong? Is it Dad? Did something happen to Arthur? I still called him Arthur. I hadn't called him Dad out loud in a decade. No, yes, I mean he's fine physically, Lucas stammered, his words tripping over each other in a frantic rush. I'm at the house. We started the basement reno today. You know, the one Sylvia has been nagging him about for 3 years, the wood paneling in the den. We started ripping it out. I closed my eyes, pinching the bridge of my nose. I didn't want to hear about the house. I didn't want to visualize the beige hallways or the oak staircase of my childhood home. Lucas, I have a deposition in an hour. Why are you telling me this? Because I found it, he whispered. The whisper was louder than a scream. It was heavy, laden with a horror I couldn't comprehend. Found what? Asbestos, mold. The money, Lauren, he said, his voice breaking into a sob. I found the $30,000. The world stopped. The hum of the air conditioner, the distant traffic of the city, the ticking of the clock, it all vanished into a vacuum of ringing silence. My blood ran cold, then hot, flushing through my veins with a prickly, painful heat. What did you say? I asked, my voice barely a croak. I pulled down the corner panel near the old wet bar. Lucas was crying now, open, unashamed, weeping. There was a hollow space between the studs. There's a manila envelope taped to the backside of the drywall. It's thick, Lauren. It's filled with hundreds. And there's a note. I gripped the edge of my desk so hard my knuckles turned the color of bone. A note. It's in his handwriting, Lucas said, and I could hear the rustle of paper through the phone, a sound that made me nauseous. It's dated from the year Mom left him. It says, "Emergency fund, do not declare in settlement." He hid it, Lauren. He hid it to keep it from Mom during the divorce, and then he must have forgotten. I couldn't breathe. My chest felt like it was being crushed by a hydraulic press. 10 years, 10 years of shame, 10 years of carrying the label of thief. 10 years of my father telling aunts, uncles, cousins, and neighbors that his own daughter had robbed him blind. He forgot, I repeated, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. I'm holding it right now, Lucas wept. Lauren, I'm so sorry, I believed him, we all believed him. The betrayal didn't hit me like a wave, it hit me like a physical blow to the gut. It wasn't just that I was innocent, I had known that for a decade. It was that the truth had been sitting behind a pile of cheap wood paneling the entire time I was struggling to pay for college. The entire time I was eating ramen in a studio apartment because I had been disowned. The entire time I was building a career based on finding the truth because my own truth had been denied. Where is he? I asked. My voice was no longer my own. It was cold, detached, mechanical. He's upstairs, Lucas said. He doesn't know I found it yet. Sylvia is out shopping. It's just me and the crew. Take a picture, I commanded, my forensic training overriding the emotional collapse. Take a picture of the money in the wall before you move it. Take a picture of the note. Take a picture of the date. Send them to me. Now. Lauren. Do it, Lucas, I snapped, startling myself, and do not let him destroy it. I hung up the phone and stared at the blank screen. A single tear leaked out, hot and stinging, tracing a path down my cheek. The diagnosis of my life had just changed. I wasn't the black sheep. I wasn't the failure. I was the victim of a senile man's greed and a family's willingness to believe the worst of me. The betrayal was worse than the diagnosis itself. It was a retroactive execution of my character, and today, the dead woman was walking out of the grave. My phone pinged 3 times in rapid succession. The photos appeared on my screen, high-resolution evidence of my exoneration. The first photo showed the jagged hole in the dark 1970s wood paneling. Inside the dusty cavity between the wooden studs, a thick, yellowed envelope was duct-taped to the drywall. It looked ancient, a relic of a different era. The second photo was the money. Lucas had fanned it out on the dusty concrete floor. Stacks of $100 bills, bound in bank straps that had turned brittle with age. The third photo was the kill shot, a close-up of the note. It was written on the back of a receipt from a hardware store, the ink slightly faded, but unmistakably Arthur's jagged, aggressive scrawl. Rainy Day Fund, hide from lawyers until finalized. The date on the receipt was 2 months before my mother's divorce was finalized and 3 years before the money supposedly went missing. I stared at the handwriting. I knew the loop of that R. I knew the sharp cross of the T. It was the same handwriting that had signed my report cards, the same handwriting that had written checks for my piano lessons before everything went to hell. Seeing it now, attached to the instrument of my destruction, made me feel physically ill. I grabbed the trash can beneath my desk and dry heaved, my body trying to expel the toxicity of the memory. He hadn't just forgotten. He had hidden assets to cheat my mother, failed to retrieve them, and then, when he found the safe empty, because he never put the money in there in the first place, he decided it was easier to blame the teenager living in the house than to admit he had lost track of his own illicit stash. Or maybe he truly had forgotten. Maybe his mind, cluttered with greed and the stress of the divorce, had simply erased the memory of the wall. But that didn't matter. What mattered was the swiftness with which he had pointed the finger at me. My computer screen blurred. I needed air. I stood up, my legs feeling like jelly, and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the city. The cars below looked like ants. People rushing to meetings, to lunches, to lovers. None of them knew that my entire identity had been reset in the span of a 5-minute phone call. My phone buzzed again, a text message. My heart hammered against my ribs. Was it Lucas again? I looked, it wasn't Lucas. It was a number I hadn't saved, but one I knew by heart. I had deleted it 10 years ago, but the digits were burned into my brain. Arthur. I stared at the preview, my breath catching in my throat. Lucas showed me, I'm in shock. A terrible mistake was made. We need to put this behind us. Come to dinner Sunday. Sylvia will cook. Let's move past this. I read it twice, then a third time. A terrible mistake was made. Not "I made a terrible mistake." Not "I am so sorry I ruined your life." Just the passive voice, the coward's grammar, and then the audacity of the invitation. Sylvia will cook, as if a pot roast could erase a decade of trauma. As if Sylvia, the woman who had fueled the fire, was going to welcome me back with open arms. I didn't reply. I couldn't. If I typed what I wanted to say, I would burn a bridge I needed to cross strategically. I went back to my desk and sat down. I looked at the photos again. I zoomed in on the date. I zoomed in on the serial numbers of the bills. The grief began to curdle, hardening into something cold and sharp. It was a familiar feeling, one I used every day in my work. It was the feeling of locking onto a target. Arthur and Sylvia thought this was a family squabble. They thought this was an oops moment that could be smoothed over with a hug and a welcome home. I was still the 19-year-old girl who cried and begged for them to believe her. They had no idea who I had become. I opened a new file on my secure server. I named it Case File Family. They wanted to move past this. They wanted to pretend 10 years of exile hadn't happened. I looked at the text message again. Let's move past this. They had forgotten one crucial thing. I didn't just count money for a living. I hunted down people who hid the truth for financial gain. I knew how to trace more than just bank accounts. I knew how to trace intent. And if Arthur had hidden $30,000 from my mother, what else was he hiding? And more importantly, what was Sylvia hiding? I picked up my phone, but I didn't text Arthur. I texted Lucas. Don't let them throw away the note. Keep the original. I'm coming on Sunday. But Lucas, don't tell them I'm bringing my laptop. The trap wasn't set by them this time. It was being set by me. To understand why the rage burned so hot, you have to understand the girl I was before the accusation. I wasn't a rebel. I wasn't the problem child. I was the caretaker. When my mother left, driven away by Arthur's coldness and his obsession with appearances, I was the one who stepped up. I was 18. I deferred my college acceptance for a year to stay home and help run the household because Arthur was too depressed to manage the bills or the groceries. I cooked his meals. I did his laundry. I made sure Lucas, who was only 12 at the time, got to soccer practice and finished his homework. I was the glue holding the fractured remnants of our family together. I sacrificed my social life, my freedom, and my first year of adulthood to ensure Arthur didn't crumble. And then came Sylvia. Sylvia was a lifestyle consultant, a vague profession that seemed to involve a lot of shopping and judging other people's curtains. She met Arthur at a country club mixer 6 months after the divorce. She was beautiful in a sharp, manicured way, always perfectly coiffed, wearing jewelry that looked slightly too expensive for the occasion, and possessing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She moved in 3 months later. The dynamic shifted immediately. I went from being the valued daughter caretaker to the unwanted relic of the previous administration. Sylvia didn't like that I knew how Arthur took his coffee. She didn't like that I managed the household budget. She treated me like a disgruntled employee she couldn't legally fire. "Lauren, sweetie," she would say, her voice dripping with artificial honey, "don't you think it's time you focused on your own life? You're always hovering." She began to plant seeds of doubt in Arthur's mind. If I bought groceries, she would ask Arthur why the bill was so high, implying I was skimming change. If I went out with friends, she would ask Arthur if he had noticed any of his liquor missing. She was subtle, methodical, and relentless. Then came the day of the theft. I was 19. I had finally rescheduled my college start date and was packing to leave in 2 weeks. Arthur came storming into my room, his face a mask of purple rage I had never seen before. Sylvia was standing in the doorway behind him, looking concerned, performatively concerned. "Where is it?" Arthur had screamed, throwing my neatly packed suitcases off the bed. "Where is what?" I was terrified. "The $30,000. I put it in the safe yesterday. It's gone. You're the only one who knows the combination besides me." I didn't touch it. I didn't even know there was money in there, I pleaded. Sylvia stepped forward, placing a calming hand on Arthur's arm. Arthur, maybe she needed it for school. You know how expensive tuition is. Maybe she felt entitled to it, since she helped out so much. It was a masterclass in manipulation. She didn't accuse me directly. She provided a motive that sounded plausible to a man already paranoid about his finances. "Is that it?" Arthur roared at me. "You think I owe you this? You steal from me after I put a roof over your head." "No, Dad, please, I swear." He didn't listen. He tore my room apart. When he didn't find the cash, because it was in the wall, rotting behind the paneling downstairs, he decided I must have already deposited it or given it to a friend. "Get out," he spat. "Get out of my house. You are dead to me. I don't want a thief for a daughter." I left that night with 2 garbage bags of clothes and $40 in my pocket. I slept in my car for 3 days before a friend's mom took me in. Now, 10 years later, I sat in my high-rise apartment, looking at a dossier I had compiled on Sylvia over the last 3 hours. I had access to databases that the average person didn't know existed: public records, credit headers, lien filings. Sylvia hadn't just been a lifestyle consultant. Before she met Arthur, she had been named in 2 civil lawsuits regarding misappropriation of funds. An elderly aunt she was caring for. Both cases were settled out of court, sealed, but the trail was there. And currently, I pulled up the property tax records for Arthur's house. There was a lien on it, a lien recorded 6 months ago. I pulled up Arthur's credit report, soft inquiries only, legally distinct but telling. His score had tanked. He was maxed out on 3 cards. Sylvia wasn't just the reason I was kicked out. She was currently bleeding him dry. The irony was staggering. He had accused me of stealing $30,000, only to invite a vampire into his home who was likely draining him of hundreds of thousands. I closed the laptop. The sun was setting, casting long, bloody shadows across my living room. Sunday dinner. I wasn't going there to get an apology. I knew Arthur was too proud to give a real one, and Sylvia would block it anyway. I was going there to drop a nuclear bomb. I picked up my phone and texted Lucas back. "I'll be there at 6:00. Make sure Sylvia is at the table. I have a feeling she's going to want to hear what I have to say." The days between Lucas's phone call and the Sunday dinner felt like a holding pattern in a storm. I went to work. I sat in meetings. I nodded at colleagues. But beneath the surface, my mind was running a single, continuous algorithm. How do I destroy them without hurting myself? I wasn't the 19-year-old girl who packed her life into garbage bags anymore. I was a weaponized bureaucrat. I knew that anger was a useless emotion unless it was backed by documentation. In my line of work, we had a saying: "God checks the heart, the IRS checks the receipts." I intended to be thorough. On Thursday night, I sat at my dining table, which I had converted into a war room. The dossier I had started on Sylvia was open on my laptop, but I needed more than just public records. I needed the granular details of their daily life. I needed to know where the money was bleeding from. I called Marcus. Marcus was a private investigator I used for high-net-worth divorce cases. He was expensive, discreet, and terrifyingly efficient. "Lauren," he answered on the first ring, "you don't usually call this late unless a CFO is fleeing the country." "It's personal, Marcus," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I need a full asset search and liability check on a frantic timeline. 2 subjects, Arthur, my father, and his wife, Sylvia." There was a pause on the line. Marcus knew the broad strokes of my history, that I was estranged, that I had built my life from scratch. He didn't know the details. "Personal is dangerous, Lauren, you know that. I have the social security numbers. I have the addresses. I need bank relationships, credit card balances, and any recent large-scale transactions. Specifically, I'm looking for liquidity issues." "Give me 24 hours, he said. He did it in 12. When the secure email arrived on Friday afternoon, I locked my office door and opened the PDF. What I found wasn't just financial mismanagement, it was financial cannibalism. Arthur's accounts were a disaster. The retirement fund he had spent 30 years building at the manufacturing plant, decimated. He had taken massive penalty-heavy withdrawals over the last 4 years. The logic was erratic, 10,000 here, 15,000 there. But it was Sylvia's section of the report that made my blood run cold. Sylvia had a gambling problem. It wasn't the glamorous, high-stakes poker kind. It was the sad, desperate, slot machine and online casino kind. Marcus had flagged transactions to 3 different offshore gaming sites, totaling over 6 figures in the last 3 years alone. But she was clever, she was washing it. She had set up a sole proprietorship called Sylvia's Interiors. Arthur was writing checks to this business for home renovations and consulting fees. The money went into the business account and immediately bounced out to crypto exchanges and gaming platforms. She was laundering her husband's life savings through a fake interior design business, and he was signing the checks, likely believing he was investing in her career or upgrading the house. I printed every page. I highlighted the transactions in yellow. I cross-referenced the dates of the withdrawals with the dates Arthur took out the home equity line of credit. The picture was complete. Sylvia hadn't just framed me 10 years ago to get me out of the house. She needed me gone because I was the only one who paid attention to the finances. I was the obstacle. With me out of the way, she had a free run at a lonely, guilty man's wallet. I organized the evidence into a sleek, black leather presentation folder. It looked identical to the ones I presented to district attorneys. I wasn't just bringing a grievance to dinner, I was bringing an indictment. The drive to the suburbs was surreal. The autumn leaves were turning, painting the streets in vibrant oranges and reds, a stark contrast tee. Oh, the gray numbness in my chest. I pulled up to the house at 5:55 p.m. It looked different. The front lawn, once my mother's pride and joy with her chaotic, beautiful wildflower garden, had been paved over with stamped concrete and manicured topiary bushes. It looked sterile, expensive, soulless. Lucas's truck was already in the driveway. That was good. I needed him there as a witness, but also as a buffer. I grabbed the black leather folder from the passenger seat, took a deep breath, and stepped out of the car. My heels clicked loudly on the new concrete path. Click, 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 the sound of a reckoning approaching. I didn't knock, I still had a key, not the one I gave back 10 years ago, but a mental one. I knew the door would be unlocked. It always was on Sundays. I pushed the door open. The smell hit me first. It used to smell like old books and lemon polish. Now it smelled of cloying vanilla potpourri, thick and artificial, trying to mask something stale underneath. "Hello," I called out. My voice was calm, projecting the professional authority I had spent a decade cultivating. Arthur appeared from the living room. He looked older, much older. He had shrunk, his shoulders hunched, his hair thinned to wisps of white. He was wearing a cardigan that looked too big for him. "Lauren," he said. He stopped 5 feet away from me. He looked at me with watery, uncertain eyes. He took a half step forward, raising his arms slightly as if to initiate a hug, then dropped them when he saw the stiffness in my posture. "You came." "I said I would," I replied. I didn't smile. I didn't move toward him. "It's good to see you," he stammered. "You look successful. Lucas says you're an accountant." "Forensic accountant," I corrected him. "I investigate financial fraud." The color drained slightly from his face, though I doubted he understood the full implication yet. "Well," he said, rubbing his hands together nervously. "Dinner is almost ready. Sylvia is just finishing up the gravy. Come in, come in." I walked into the living room. Lucas was standing by the fireplace, holding a beer. He looked pale, his eyes darting between me and the kitchen. He gave me a tiny, imperceptible nod. Then Sylvia breezed in. She had aged, but she was fighting it with expensive interventions. Her skin was too tight, her lips slightly too full. She wore a silk blouse and heavy gold jewelry, jewelry that I now knew was bought with Arthur's liquidated 401k. "Lauren," she exclaimed, wiping her hands on a decorative towel. She acted as if I were a niece visiting from college, not the stepdaughter she had engineered into homelessness. "My goodness, look at you. So sharp, so corporate." "Sylvia," I said, acknowledging her with a nod that was more of a dismissal. "Let's sit," Arthur said quickly, sensing the drop in barometric pressure. "Let's just sit and eat." We moved to the dining room. The table was set with the good china, my mother's china. I felt a spike of rage but tamped it down. We sat, Arthur at the head, Sylvia to his right, me to his left, Lucas across from me. Arthur cleared his throat. "Before we eat, I just want to say, I'm glad we're doing this. The discovery Lucas made, it was a shock, a terrible shock." He looked at me, his eyes pleading for absolution without wanting to do the work of asking for it. I don't know how I forgot about that money in the wall, the divorce, the stress. My mind was a mess back then, and when the safe was empty, well, it seemed like the only explanation. "It wasn't the only explanation," I said, my voice cutting through the room like a scalpel. "It was just the explanation Sylvia gave you." Sylvia dropped her fork. It clattered loudly against the china. "Excuse me," she laughed, a high, brittle sound. "Arthur, I think emotions are running a little high." "No," I said, turning my gaze fully onto her. "Let's talk about the timeline, Sylvia. 10 years ago, Arthur told you the money was missing. You didn't suggest checking the bank records. You didn't suggest calling the police. You immediately suggested I took it. You specifically told him, maybe she feels entitled to it." "I was trying to find a reason," Sylvia said, her eyes widening in mock innocence. "I was trying to soften the blow for your father. I didn't want him to call the cops on his own daughter." "You didn't want the cops involved at all," I said calmly. "Because if the cops came, they would have fingerprinted the safe. And they would have found your prints on it, wouldn't they?" "That is paranoid nonsense," Sylvia spat, looking at Arthur. "Arthur, are you going to let her come into your house and attack me? After I cooked this meal? After I've taken care of you for 10 years while she was off playing the victim?" Arthur looked torn. He looked at me, then at Sylvia. "Lauren, please. Sylvia has been my rock. She helped me through the darkest times." "She isolated you, Arthur," I said. "There is a difference." "We invited you here to make peace," Arthur said, his voice rising, trembling with the old stubbornness. "I am willing to apologize for the mistake with the money. I am willing to say I was wrong about the theft, but I will not have you disrespecting my wife. If we are going to move past this, you need to drop this hostility." "Move past it?" I repeated. I reached into my bag and pulled out the black leather folder. I placed it on the table next to the gravy boat. The heavy thud it made silenced the room. "I can't move past it, Arthur, because the theft didn't happen 10 years ago. It's happening right now." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Lucas stared at the folder as if it were a bomb. Sylvia stared at it as if it were a snake. "What is that?" Arthur asked, pointing a shaking finger at the folder. "This," I said, placing my hand on the leather cover, "is an audit of your life for the last 5 years. Since you invited me here to clear the air, I decided we should clear everything." Sylvia stood up, her chair scraping violently against the hardwood. "This is ridiculous. I'm not sitting here for this. Get out, Lauren. You're clearly unstable." "Sit down, Sylvia," Lucas said. It was the first time Lucas had spoken since we sat down. His voice was deep, resonant, and furious. He wasn't the little brother anymore. He was a man who had just ripped a wall apart and found the truth. "Sit down. I want to see what she has." Sylvia froze. She looked at Arthur for support, but Arthur was staring at the folder, mesmerized by the label I had printed on the front. "Arthur and Sylvia Financial Liability Report." "Open it, Dad," Lucas said. Arthur reached out with a trembling hand and flipped the cover open. "Page 1, I guided him, my voice devoid of emotion. "That is a copy of a lien placed on this house 6 months ago. The county tax assessor filed it. You haven't paid property taxes in 2 years." Arthur squinted at the document. What? Number Sylvia pays the bills, she handles the accounts. She told me everything was filed. He looked up at Sylvia, confusion warring with denial. Sylvia, what is this? Sylvia was pale, her hands gripping the back of her chair. It's a mistake, Arthur. The county makes mistakes all the time. I have the receipts upstairs. You don't have receipts, I interjected. Page 2, your credit card statements. Specifically, the joint account you added Sylvia to 4 years ago. It's maxed out. $45,000. Minimum payments only for the last 18 months. Arthur flipped the page. He stared at the numbers, the red ink, the interest charges. I don't use this card, Arthur whispered. I thought we paid it off. Keep going, I said. Page 3 is the most interesting. It's a summary of checks written from your primary checking account to Sylvia's Interiors. A sole proprietorship registered to Sylvia. Over the last 3 years, you have signed checks totaling $112,000 to this business. Arthur looked up, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. That was for the renovations, the kitchen, the landscaping. She manages the contractors. Dad, Lucas said, his voice breaking. I'm a contractor. I did the kitchen. You paid me directly for materials, remember? And I did the labor for free because I'm your son. You didn't pay Sylvia a dime for the kitchen. Arthur turned slowly to look at his wife. The denial was cracking. The reality was seeping in, ugly and undeniable. Sylvia, where did that money go? Sylvia's face twisted. The mask of the doting wife dissolved, replaced by the cornered rat. I invested it. I was trying to grow our savings because your pension wasn't enough. I was trying to help us. Invested in what? I asked. Turn to page 4. Arthur turned the page. Offshore gaming sites, I recited. Jackpot Jungle. Caribbean Stud Online. The money goes into Sylvia's Interiors, and within 24 hours, it is transferred to payment processors in Malta and Curacao. It's not an investment, Sylvia. You're gambling it. You've gambled away his retirement. You little witch, Sylvia screamed. She lunged toward the table, grabbing for the folder. Lucas was faster. He slammed his hand down on the open binder, pinning it to the table. Don't touch it. She hacked us, Sylvia shrieked, turning to Arthur, grabbing his arm, shaking him. Arthur, she's a criminal. She hacked our bank accounts. This is illegal. You have to call the police on her. She's doing it again. She's trying to destroy us. Arthur looked at Sylvia's frantic, contorted face. Then he looked at the document under Lucas's hand. He looked at the withdrawal dates. He looked at his own signature on the checks, signatures he had provided blindly, trusting the woman who slept beside him. Arthur, Sylvia pleaded, tears streaming down her face, fake, weaponized tears. She's jealous. She's always been G. A lose of me. She wants to ruin your happiness because she's miserable. Tell her to leave. Arthur didn't speak. He looked at me. His eyes were filled with a profound, crushing realization. He wasn't looking at a thief. He was looking at the daughter he had sacrificed to appease a parasite. I didn't hack anything, I said quietly. I hired a professional because I knew what I would find. I knew it because innocent people don't frame teenagers for theft, Sylvia. Only guilty people do that. You framed me 10 years ago because you needed access to the accounts, and I was the one watching them. Arthur, say something, Sylvia screamed. Arthur slowly stood up. He pushed his chair back. He looked at the welcome home, pot roast cooling on the table. He looked at the expensive curtains. He looked at the woman he had chosen over his own flesh and blood. Is it true? Arthur asked, his voice barely a whisper. The gambling, is it true? It's a hobby, Sylvia stammered, stepping back. I win sometimes. I was going to pay it back. I just had a run of bad luck. A run of bad luck, Arthur repeated. He laughed, a dry, wheezing sound. You told me Lauren stole $30,000. I cut her out of my will. I told my brothers she was a criminal. I missed her graduation. I missed 10 years. He turned to me. Tears were finally spilling from his eyes, tracking through the deep wrinkles on his face. Lauren, he choked out. I'm not done, Arthur, I said. I wasn't going to let him off the hook with just sadness. We were past sadness. We were in the realm of consequences. There is one more document, I said. Page 5. Arthur looked down at the folder again, fearful of what else could possibly exist. It's a power of attorney form, I said. Drafted last week. It hasn't been filed yet, but it's signed, by you. Arthur stared at it. I never signed this. Look closer, I said. It's a trace, a very good one, but a trace. She was preparing to take full legal control of your assets, Arthur. She was going to put you in a home. She was preparing to liquidate the house. Sylvia went silent. The screaming stopped. The crying stopped. She stood there, cold and hard, realizing the game was completely, irrevocably over. You should have stayed away, Sylvia hissed at me, her voice low and venomous. You should have checked the wall, I replied. The air in the dining room was so charged with tension it felt like ozone before a lightning strike. The power of attorney document lay on the table between us, a single sheet of paper that weighed more than the entire house. Sylvia didn't move. She stared at the forged signature, her chest heaving, her eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal looking for a vent to squeeze through. The silence was broken only by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, a clock that, according to my report, she had tried to appraise for sale 2 weeks ago. You forged it, Arthur said. His voice was no longer the wavering, confused mumble of an old man. It was low, guttural, and trembling with a rage that had been dormant for a decade. You were going to commit me. You were going to take the house. It was for your own good, Sylvia shrieked, abandoning all pretense of the doting wife. Her face twisted into a snarl, revealing the ugly, desperate reality beneath the Botox and the foundation. You're getting old, Arthur. You're forgetting things. Look at you, you're a mess. You needed someone to manage your decline. My decline? Arthur stood up straighter, gripping the edge of the table. The only thing declining was my bank account because you were draining it dry. I earned that money, Sylvia screamed, slamming her hands onto the table, causing the wine glasses to jump. I put up with you for 10 years. I put up with your boring stories, your cheap habits, your depressing house. I earned every cent. And you, she spun toward me, her finger pointing like a dagger, you ruined everything. You jealous, miserable little. She lunged. It wasn't a calculated move. It was a burst of pure, chaotic malice. She grabbed the heavy crystal gravy boat from the table and hurled it at me. Lauren, Lucas shouted. I didn't flinch. I didn't have to. The heavy crystal vessel sailed past my shoulder and shattered against the wall behind me, spraying brown gravy over the expensive wallpaper Sylvia had likely paid for with embezzled funds. The violence of the act seemed to snap something in Arthur. Get out, Arthur roared. It was a sound I hadn't heard since the night he kicked me out. But this time, the target was correct. Get out of my house. I'm not going anywhere, Sylvia yelled back, her voice hysterical. This is my house. I have rights. You can't just kick me out. Actually, I said, my voice calm, cutting through the chaos. He can, and they can help. I looked toward the front window. Blue and red lights were washing over the living room walls, pulsy. NG in a rhythmic, silent strobe. Sylvia froze. She looked at the window, then back at me. What did you do? Forgery is a felony, Sylvia, I said, standing up slowly. Elder financial abuse is a felony. When I found the trace of the power of attorney and the structuring of the bank transfers, I didn't just print a report. I called the district attorney's fraud unit. I used to work with the lead prosecutor. He took my call. A heavy pounding echoed from the front door. Bang, bangs, bang. Police, open up. Sylvia's face went unimaginable shades of gray. She looked at the back door, clearly calculating a run for it. Don't even think about it, Lucas said, stepping into her path, crossing his arms over his chest. He looked like a stone wall. You're done, Sylvia. Arthur walked past her. He didn't look at her. He didn't flinch as she reached out to grab his sleeve. He pulled his arm away as if her touch burned him. He walked to the front door and threw it open. 2 uniformed officers and a detective in a cheap suit stood on the porch. I recognized the detective, Miller. We had worked a case involving a corrupt HOA treasurer 3 years ago. "Arthur, regarding Sylvia," Miller asked. "She's in the dining room," Arthur said. His voice was hollow, stripped of all energy. "Take her, just please, take her." The officers moved in. The scene that followed was the public humiliation Sylvia had spent her life avoiding. They marched her out the front door, her hands cuffed behind her back. She wasn't going quietly. She was screaming, cursing, blaming everyone but herself. "He told me to do it. He's senile. She's lying. It's a setup." Her shrieks echoed through the quiet suburban cul-de-sac. Neighbors were coming out onto their porches. The Johnsons from across the street, the Millers next door, people who had listened to Arthur tell them for 10 years that his daughter was a thief, were now watching the perfect second wife being stuffed into the back of a squad car. I stood in the doorway, watching the spectacle. I felt Lucas's hand on my shoulder. "You okay?" he asked softly. I watched the police car pull away, the red tail lights fading into the darkness. "I am now," I said. We turned back to the house. Arthur was standing in the middle of the hallway, staring at the empty space where the police had just been. He looked small. He looked broken. He turned slowly to face me. The anger was gone, replaced by a crushing, suffocating shame. He looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in a decade. He didn't see the thief he had invented. He saw the woman who had just saved his life. "Lauren," he whispered, his voice cracking. "My God, Lauren." He fell to his knees. He didn't just sit, he collapsed, burying his face in his hands, sobbing. It wasn't a polite cry. It was the deep, ugly weeping of a man who realizes he has thrown away the only things that ever mattered for a lie. The fallout was swift, brutal, and legally fascinating. With the evidence I provided, the district attorney didn't hesitate. Sylvia was charged with 3 counts of forgery, multiple counts of wire fraud, and elder abuse. Because of her previous settlements regarding her aunt, the judge wasn't interested in leniency. She was looking at 5 to 7 years in a state penitentiary. The divorce was processed even faster. I handled the forensic accounting for that, too. I traced every dime she had siphoned off. We managed to recover about 40% of what she had stolen, mostly by liquidating the investments she had stashed in a crypto wallet she thought we wouldn't find. It wasn't everything, but it was enough to save the house from the tax lien and stabilize Arthur's retirement. But the real work wasn't in the courtroom. It was in the house. 2 weeks after the arrest, I went back to the house on a Saturday. Lucas was there, helping Arthur patch the hole in the paneling where the money had been found. The house was quiet. The smell of vanilla potpourri was gone, replaced by the smell of sawdust and fresh coffee. It smelled like home again. I walked into the den. Arthur was sitting in his armchair, the same one he used to read to me in when I was a child. He looked better. The stress lines around his eyes had softened, though the sadness in them was permanent. When he saw me, he put down his newspaper and stood up. "Lauren," he said, "I didn't know if you'd come." "I needed to bring you the final paperwork for the lien release," I said, placing a folder on the coffee table. "The house is safe, Dad." "Dad." It was the first time I had said it out loud. Arthur flinched, his eyes filling with tears. He walked over to the mantel above the fireplace. He picked up an envelope, the dusty, yellowed envelope Lucas had pulled from the wall. He held it out to me. "Take it," he said. "Dad, I don't want the money," I said. "Put it back in your retirement fund." "No," he shook his head vigorously. "I don't want it. That money cost me 10 years of my life with you. Every time I look at it, I feel sick. It was the root of everything. My greed during the divorce, my secrecy, my stupidity." He stepped closer, pressing the envelope into my hands. His hands were warm and rough, just like I remembered. "Please," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I can't buy back the time, Lauren, I know that. I can't buy back the graduation I missed. I can't buy back the nights you spent sleeping in your car. I will never forgive myself for that. Never. But I need you to take this. Use it for something good. Use it to, I don't know, just take it away from me. I looked down at the envelope. $30,000. It had destroyed my life, and in a strange way, it had built my life. Without the accusation, I never would have become a forensic accountant. I never would have developed the spine of steel that allowed me to take down Sylvia. Okay, I said softly, I'll take it. There's one more thing, Arthur said. He took a deep breath. I called your Uncle Jerry and your Aunt Marie and the neighbors. Why? I asked, tensing up. I told them, he said. I told them everything. I told them I was the one who lost the money. I told them I falsely accused you. I told them you are the most honest, brilliant person I know and that you saved me from a con artist. I told them that I was the thief. I stole your reputation. The knot that had been in my chest for 10 years, the knot of shame, of worrying what people thought of me, finally loosened. Thank you, I whispered. Arthur opened his arms. Can I? I hesitated for a second, the old instincts of self-preservation flaring up. But then I looked at Lucas, who was smiling from the corner of the room, holding a drywall saw. I looked at my father, a flawed, broken man who was trying to put the pieces back together. I stepped forward and hugged him. He held me tight, shaking with silent sobs, smelling of old spice and sawdust. I'm so sorry, Bean, he whispered into my hair, using the nickname he hadn't used since I was 12. I'm so sorry. I know, I said, and for the first time, I felt like I could actually start to forgive him. Later that afternoon, I walked out to my car. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant hues of violet and gold. I tossed the envelope onto the passenger seat. I wasn't going to spend it. I was going to start a scholarship fund for students who had been kicked out of their homes. I was going to turn the symbol of my exile into someone else's lifeline. I started the engine and looked back at the house. Lucas was waving from the porch. Arthur was standing in the doorway, watching me go. I wasn't the victim anymore. I wasn't the accused. I was Lauren, the woman who found the truth, cleared the ledger, and finally, after 10 long years, balanced the books. I put the car in drive and pulled away, leaving the ghosts of the past behind the freshly patched drywall.